All right, it is 5 minutes after the hour. We've still got a few folks joining us slowly, but I think most of us are here. Thank you so much for joining us today for AFP WNC's virtual Zoom program offering today. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce Mark, who is someone who needs no introduction to this group, but I feel honored to be able to offer him one anyway. We are not breaking into small groups for this discussion. So if you have questions as Mark is moving through, please use the chat function to send those questions. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and relaying those questions to Mark, or pausing him to try to get those in. You are all muted to help with background noise, but if your question is such that I need you to speak, I can selectively unmute you. So with those housekeeping notes out of the way, this program today is COVID-19, the new rules for grant seeking, and it's brought to you by Mark Goldstein, CFRE. Mark is most sought after as an expert in proposal writing and is a project strategist. He's the president, CEO of Communication Mark, a grant writing firm founded in 2000. He originated the open communication fundraising model, a system that enables organizations to work cooperatively toward community and fundraising goals. Mark has consistently served nonprofits as a staff member, board member, and consultant in 1991. He's raised more than $50 million for his clients and employers by obtaining grants for organizations of all types, sizes, and locales, particularly health and human services, community development, and technology needs. Mark is an active member of AFP WNC and the Grant Professionals Association. In 2019, he was selected by his peers at AFP as the region's Outstanding Fundraising Executive. He regularly provides training sessions through a number of venues, including the Duke University Continuing Studies Nonprofit Management Program, Alliance for Better Nonprofits, and WNC Nonprofit Pathways. And he's a grant writer contracted by the Dogwood Health Trust Leverage Fund. So with that introduction, I will turn things over to Mark. Again, if you have questions, please submit those through the chat, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Ben. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Okay. You see that, Ben? Okay, I'm assuming that everybody can see me okay. So thanks for attending today. And I'm gonna go through just some observations that I've seen in just what's happened over the last couple months. It's been pretty nutty for us here writing grants through all of this, and I'm sure it's been the same for all of you as well in various ways. A couple quick disclaimers about what this presentation isn't, just based on some feedback that I received doing a similar webinar a week or so ago. I'm not going to be saying a lot about how to do grant writing. I'm mostly just commenting on how I've seen things change. That said, if you do have any questions that you want to follow up with me on after or even during, then I'm going to take questions, and I'm hoping to get questions as we go forward through this. Also, there are things, as you probably noticed, that are changing on an almost daily basis. So I did make an effort the past day or so to review all of the links on this presentation, which, by the way, as you can see on the on this opening page here, they're all online, all of these links. You can also just go to my homepage, and there's a link there to it as well. But if you want to follow along with the links as we go so that you can actually look at some of these sites, I'm not going to be visiting the sites, I'm just going to be referring to them. But you might want to do that either now or after. But so a couple, another disclaimer besides that one is, besides the one about the grant seeking instruction, is just because things are changing, if you have any knowledge that I don't have, or if there's some sources that I don't cover, or sources that I'm not covering, please do feel free to chime in, and would love to hear from you, because you know, I'm certainly not going to know everything that's going on out there right now. Likewise, I'm talking about a lot of programs here that are ones that are very new. They've just come open the last couple months. And so I feel as though I know more about them than a lot of people because I've been dealing with them a lot the last couple months. But that said, I'm not an expert on every element of all these. And it seems that almost no one else is either, just from even talking to people who work on the programs. And so, so please do ask questions, and if I can, I'll answer them. And if not, then I can try to help find some answers. So fundraising strategy. So one thing, and I think that this will be clear to most folks on the call, but in case it isn't, I still hear sometimes, even as early as this, as recent as this morning, I've heard a colleague just talking about, I feel so bad asking everybody for help right now. And obviously it's, you know, this is as tough a time as any to ask for help. But for the most part, I've seen a lot of organizations that are asking and just doing it in a way that's sensitive and that's thoughtful. And so I just wanted to fully endorse that, you know, from the outset is this is certainly not a time to sit back and to not be asking for support. And that goes, you know, I think for grants and for any other type of fundraising that you're able to do right now. It's been great to see what folks are doing. I've seen a lot of creative approaches, a lot of people switching gears from having events and switching to other types of ways to raise funds. And also, you know, what I've seen as well from a lot of clients that are trying to replace grant money or trying to speak with donors or private donor-directed fund holders, you know, to ask for support is that right now also just asking seems to work just about as well than doing something really clever, because people do know how dire things are for organizations and for people in our communities right now. I'm going to mention a lot of different strategies just in case some of you haven't tried these yet. And again, you know, some of these are fundamentals, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware that these are possibilities. And so I'm going to go through all these anyway, though some of you, I'm sure, have thought of these. Asking current grant makers to adjust contracts is one thing to do if you have not already done that. You know, again, I wouldn't hesitate to ask for just about anything you need right now, and this is no exception. So many clients that I'm working with have told me that they've spoken with folks who gave them grants before COVID-19 happened, who they've then picked up the phone and they've called and they've said to the funder, obviously a lot has changed and you had given us a restricted grant to do such and such, and we'd like to know if it's okay if we use it for unrestricted purposes or for this other purpose that we need right now just to get through this crisis. So wouldn't hesitate to do that at this point if you need to and you haven't done something like that. Do something completely different, like John Cleese, if you're a Monty Python fan, as a survival strategy now. And so by that I mean that I also have clients who are doing things that are nothing like what they usually do, but it's something that they have figured out that they can do to get through this time. And some of them have received grants to do these different sorts of things. So just a couple of quick examples of that. There's at least 2 of my clients who have never done this before they're making masks right now. They're making personal protective equipment, and they're getting funds to do that. And they've got their staff making equipment and volunteers doing that. And there's a lot of people at a lot of states, including North Carolina, and other folks who are buying those up right now. And it's a way for them to keep going. I've also had clients who are classified as non-essential that have made themselves more essential by working with healthcare providers and others who are doing essential work. I know that in North Carolina, a lot of the restrictions have started to be rolled back. And so that might not be as important as it once was, but that's also something that you still might want to consider if you're in something that's technically non-essential. So in terms of other resources that are out there and strategies, so just want to make sure that you're all taking advantage of everything that you can. So particularly if you're not getting an SBA loan, some of these that I'm mentioning these next few minutes, there's some limitations if you have an SBA loan, or you might not qualify if you have an SBA loan, but if you don't have a loan, and in some cases, even if you do, there's some caveats that they list in the details, but particularly if you don't have an SBA loan, to take advantage of employee retention credits that you can get if you're operating a nonprofit, and deferring employer shares of Social Security taxes. So you can, if your cash flow is really poor right now, you can defer your Social Security taxes, and you have a couple of years to have to pay those. So, and also, I wanted to note too that there's been some changes to limitations on charitable contributions, and so that might be another thing that you want to share with donors if you're not doing that already. And the link on this page has more details on all of that. If you go to that link and scan through it, it's got information on a lot of that. So fundraising strategies. So this is, I think, an appropriate time for this famous Einstein quote here: "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." And so I do see a lot of nonprofits taking advantage of opportunities that they're seeing to get it, to make new connections in the community, to do things that are going to help them to not only recover from the crisis, but also just doing things that will give them an advantage at this time and after the crisis. And so, for example, there's one client that we have that they typically do a lot of group trainings, and as part of what's happened is they've had to move to virtual trainings, but they also are recognizing, well, this is something that we probably should do anyway, or could do, and it could expand in the long term what we're doing, and it could make us more efficient. And so there's a lot of groups that I've talked to that they're realizing that, hey, actually, doing some of this over distance is actually a better way to do things, or it's something that's going to be less costly and more efficient. And so that's something that perhaps we should do. So there's some great strategic resources that have been compiled by Bridgespan, which is a really terrific group that serves nonprofits. And so there's a long list of links there, and they have a lot of documents there on how to reconfigure your strategies, so that if your strategies that you normally would follow as an organization have been really slammed and they're not really valid, at least in the short term, there's advice on how to go about changing those, and resources for boards, and just a lot of good stuff there if you're not really sure how to proceed, and if you need guidance in various areas. And then I'm just gonna pause there for just a moment, and just, if there's any questions that you're seeing coming in, please feel free to interrupt me, because I see that some people have chatted, but I'm not looking directly at those at the minute. But any questions that you want to jump in with right now, Ben?
Mark, we have a question. Could you speak more to employee retention credits? What are these and how do we apply?
Yeah, so so the employee retention credits, if you go to the link on that page, it says more, but I'm just looking through my notes here and I'll read you a little bit more. So, so basically the employee retention credits, it provides a refundable payroll tax credit for 50% of wages paid by employers to employees during the crisis. So it gives you a break with the share of payroll taxes that that your organization is responsible for. And it's available to employers who were fully or partially suspended due to a COVID-19 shutdown order, or where gross receipts declined by more than 50% when compared to the same quarter in the prior year. And there's various caps, and again, there's various caveats and things like that. And so, you know, definitely go to that page, but it applies to wages paid between March 12th and January 1st of 2021. And so it still applies for quite a while. And you're not eligible if you got a PPP loan, but my understanding is that if you got another type of loan, or if you didn't get a PPP loan, then you can also take advantage of that. And then, so there's a note there also about tax deferral on that page. And so what that means, someone asked me, you know, well, we're a nonprofit, so, right, we don't pay taxes on things, but you have a deferral on the payment of your share of Social Security taxes, which is 6.2% of employee wages. And so that's a little bit more detail on those items there. Is there anything else, Ben, before I jump back in that folks have asked?
Those are all the questions right now, but if folks have them, please do send them through the chat. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, please do feel free to ask questions and jump in if you have any other input. But so during the first weeks of COVID-19, one thing that's been a hard adjustment for me as a lifelong grant writer is that all of a sudden speed has become much more important in terms of just reacting, which I'm sure some of you have noticed. So, what I see the past couple weeks is that it does seem that more organizations and foundations are getting their feet back under them, and they're starting to return a little bit more towards what they would typically do in terms of normal flow of applications and that sort of thing. But I still see some funds that are having very quick turnarounds, and that are, there's been some that have closed before the deadline, and which is something that you never really see traditionally. And so, I mean, I talked to one United Way that had closed down in Central Carolinas, and they closed it early, and they said they had something like 1,500 applications, you know, which is just amazingly huge for that size of a grant maker. And so if you see an opportunity and you feel that there could be a chance that there's going to be, that they're going to cut it off early, you need to act quickly. I would just kind of assume that you need to get it in before the last day, so that you don't miss opportunities, because a lot of these have been shutting down towards the end of that. I've also seen clients making unsolicited phone calls to funders who have had a lot of luck when there's something that's an emergency. And I wouldn't call for something that is a need that every other organization is going to have, but there's one client that I have that with 2 phone calls, they got $70,000 in grants, because they basically just had a really good idea for something that was in their wheelhouse to do in terms of the response. And the funders saw that they were sort of uniquely positioned to do that. And it wasn't a group that was doing a direct and necessary direct service. It was more, more abstract than that. Full disclosure, they did have to call another 18 or so funders before they got to those, 2 that said yes. They called like 20 or so. But the point is that, just a half a day's worth of calls or so, they were able to bring in $70,000. And so, if you see that you're doing something that nobody else is doing and that is really a critical response, then you want to act. And if you're doing something that is very important, but it's not, doesn't quite rise to that level of being very, very critical, like food or housing or emergency medical response does, then don't despair, because there are more and more funders that, as they're going to be meeting these immediate needs, are going to be looking to you to restore services that are very vital, but that just are not, don't qualify as a critical, we have to do it right now kind of emergency under COVID. So, so there's some signs that, as I mentioned, that traditional rules are making a comeback, but everything is still really in flux. And so it really is more, the funders I'm finding are much more open than usual to having conversations and responding to emails and just answering people's questions and concerns. And so while traditional rules are not in place, there's some things that would be considered unthinkable in normal circumstances that you can do. So for instance, I've seen some grant makers even permitting requests for reimbursements for expenses that have been incurred, which usually grant makers will almost never give you a grant for something that you've already paid for. But you know, I've seen some grant makers even doing that. In terms of guidelines are changing pretty rapidly for a lot of funds. And so I've seen grant guidelines even change from one grant cycle to the next grant cycle of COVID-19 grants, when they're with some of these funds that are giving grants on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And so just a reminder, you know, every time you go to apply, you want to really read those guidelines closely, even if you read them a couple weeks ago. There might be some changes. So you want to keep doing that. I've seen a lot of grant makers responding really flexibly and nimbly, which is wonderful, particularly in the cases of emergencies and hard to reach populations. And so one place where I've really seen a lot of opportunities right now is for clients that are serving populations that are considered really hard to reach, like Spanish-speaking population, for instance. I have some clients who are really being sought after because that's an area of expertise for them. Reaching out to African American populations that have been really disproportionately hit by COVID-19 in a lot of areas. So, so you know, if you're serving folks like that who really need help right now and are they have their own set of challenges, then that's something that that is probably going to be especially attractive to both those making COVID-19 grants and to those who are making, quote unquote, their typical grants right now as well. So emergency grants and loans, and I do have some new information on a few of these that I'll mention that some of you might not know yet. The Community Foundation of Western North Carolina, the Emergency and Disaster Response Fund that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I checked in with program officers at the foundation yesterday, and they're almost out of money. And so they are just probably in their last days of making grants for that. And in fact, the Community Foundation said that all of their funds for this year are almost, they are or will very soon will be completely expended for this fiscal year. And that means that they're not likely to be doing much grant making until after the end of June. So their fiscal year, the end is end of June, so it's not very far away. But I just wanted to mention that in case some of you were thinking about going there and haven't yet. You might want to do it today because those funds are likely to be gone. And then they also said that they're going to be meeting in May to determine what their grant programs are going to look like over the next fiscal year. And they said they're going to be updating the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina website by the end of June. And so there should be more news about what they're going to be doing going forward. And so this is sort of something that I'm starting to see more the past few days, that there are foundations that are going through their funds, some for COVID-19 and some just normally. Another one, for instance, I saw today, I went to the site for the Cannon Foundation, which, if you're not familiar, they do a lot of grants for capital in Western North Carolina that are really rare grants, because there isn't a lot out there for capital for our region. And although it says that their grant cycle is open, there's a note on their application page that says that if you submit now, you might not get considered till December, because they've gotten so many applications. So, so I'm expecting that that's something that we're going to see more of. And so again, if you're planning to go to Cannon Foundation in the fall, or, if that was your plan A, then with, and not just with Cannon, but with other foundations as well, it's the sort of thing that you probably want to have a conversation with someone at the foundation that you're planning to go to, or that you're ones that you've got plans to go to later in the year, see where they're at and if they're still planning to have their normal funding cycles, because you might want to apply sooner rather than later, even if you would typically go at a different time of year, if you're able to, and it's not too soon for you to go back to that funder. So going back to the list here, so WNC Bridge Foundation, they've made it clear that they're using their community outreach grants that they were previously offering sponsorship opportunities for these grants that are, I believe they're all $10,000 grants. And now a lot of what they're doing, based on what I read on their website, they're definitely not giving to sponsorships anymore. And it seems like they're going to be giving to a lot of COVID-19 oriented requests. And they have a monthly deadline of the 15th, which is, 2 days from now. If you're thinking of applying very soon, it's not a difficult application, but they will have those. It's on a monthly basis, as far as I know right now. And so, you can do it next month if you can't make it this month. In case you haven't heard about these North Carolina Healthcare Association grants, those are ones that some of you might be able to apply for. And this current round, they say that they are supporting underserved populations that are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, like the uninsured, communities of color, immigrant populations, etc. And then they're also funding activities that are addressing the needs of healthcare and other frontline workers, which I think is really great and interesting. But they do say that they're going to have additional rounds. They had a round earlier this month that there was a deadline for, and it looks like they're going to be changing a little bit so that it's not just necessarily giving to essential frontline workers for each time. And so if you're providing services that otherwise fit with them, there's a lot more information on their website about what they do. And so the next cycle, it says, is going to be announced early June. And so, as with the rest of these funders, you want to check and see if what they're funding has changed by that time, because in their case, it looks like it probably will. Any other questions that have come in, Ben, in the meantime? Or should I keep plowing?
No other questions right now. If anyone has one, please go ahead and type it in.
Okay, all right, thanks. So Dogwood Health Trust, they've been doing some unique sort of entrepreneurial responses based on what they've learned and who's contacted them in the community. And they're also, they have, in case you're doing something that requires personal protection equipment, they're also doing partnerships to produce that equipment. and they have a form on their website where they're forming these partnerships to have more of that produced, it looks like. And so if you are thinking about making that equipment, like I mentioned, some clients of mine have done earlier, or if you need that PPE, then that's a site to check out. There's also a lot of other resources on that site. There's some other grant opportunities that I'm not discussing here, mostly because they're a little bit more obscure and they probably don't apply to a whole lot of nonprofits that are tuned in. But you can also look and see which opportunities they're listing there on their site. And then also the Leverage Fund, and I've got a little bit of information about that. I've been writing grant proposals for the Leverage Fund, and just if you're not familiar, I'll just say quickly that basically Dogwood will hire a grant writing consultant like myself to work with you if you're applying for a grant that's for $100,000 or more, and if the funder is outside of the region. So it's basically to bring in other money to the region, and so they would basically pay my fee or other grant writer's fee to that's not an employee to pursue a grant of $100,000 or more. So as some of you may know, the past month or so at least, they've been focusing on grants that are geared towards immediate COVID-19 response or toward COVID-19 funds. But it looks like they're considering going back to business as usual with that fund. And so I just wanted to give you a heads up about that, that if you want to apply for a grant that's say a federal grant that you apply for every year that's coming around again, and you want to have that paid for and have somebody do that for you, then keep an eye out on that fund, and you might want to check in with them even if you have something that's not COVID-19, because they might pretty soon make that change back, is what I've heard, though I don't know that that's happened yet. North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, this is one that I think it just got posted a few days ago. I just noticed it earlier this week, and I think it said it was announced on Monday. And so this is a really interesting grant opportunity. It's especially going to be interesting for those of you who do health and human services statewide, because it is designed as a statewide program. However, if you're creative, you still might be able to take advantage of this. Let's see, I was just looking to see if I've got in my notes about the deadline, but I know it's not for another month or so yet, but this is coming due. And the way you might be able to take advantage if you're not statewide is it does say in the fine print there that you can participate in a statewide network. And so if you are only serving Western North Carolina, I will be on the phone this week, calling some of your partners or colleagues in Central and Eastern North Carolina and seeing if you might be able to band together and apply for one of these grants. And then also I did see that you can get a grant of up to $75,000 to conduct a demonstration project. And so if you have some kind of concept for restoring services that's going to really help people get out of the rut that they're in right now, then you might want to also check that out and see if you might want to apply for a demonstration project grant. And it's pretty wide ranging what it's for. There's a whole list of about a dozen different things, but the primary areas that it mentions are the ones that are in this little bulleted list here, which is autism, substance abuse. There's various things for people with disabilities. There's even one for increasing athletics opportunities for kids with disabilities and for adults. There's pretty broadly is going to support programs that reduce homelessness, and there's funding for after school and mentoring. There's funding for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in general, and for mental health and for some other services. So that's a really interesting opportunity that the largest grants will be $3 million, which is the roof. And you only need a 15% match to apply. So if you're in Henderson County, there's another fund there that you could look to that it looks to still be open, which is Henderson County COVID-19 Response Fund, which is a partnership of Henderson County Community Foundation and the United Way there in Henderson County. And so if you're there and haven't looked into that yet, that's something to take a look at. If you provide a critical service, which is defined as education or utility or emergency or medical, then you should look into FEMA reimbursement. And I've heard that FEMA, traditionally, they can take a really long time to reimburse. But this program is unlike other FEMA programs, apparently, that have come in the past for hurricanes and so forth. It's a lot easier to apply for reimbursement than it sometimes has been. And I spoke with somebody at the North Carolina Emergency Management Office just this week who said that once the funds are appropriated and you're approved for reimbursement, this hasn't quite happened yet, but they said that it would be like a 20-day turnaround, with the possible exception of next month when there's different legislative slowdowns that usually come in June, he said, but typically like a 20-day turnaround for these reimbursements. Also, another one thing that you want to consider is even if you provide a non-critical but essential social service and provide those services to the general public, so in other words, you're not limited to, say, a specific faith group or something like that, it's okay if they're limited in a way just because they're very specialized, and that's why they're limited, like if they're for people with disabilities. But I can point you towards a list of services if you like, if you want to reach out to me after, if you're unsure about whether you qualify. But I imagine there's a lot of you on this call who might qualify who probably haven't thought about FEMA as a source of relief. And there's even things on there like dog shelters, because people need that if they're short on funds or if they have to be hospitalized or something like that. And so that's something that if you're providing any kind of very important social service, even if it's not an emergency service and it's an important service, then I would definitely check that out. If you haven't heard about this program, there's an FCC telehealth program. And so if you're an organization that does telehealth, I know a lot of you probably don't, so I won't linger on this, but this is funding to help to connect services and patients in response to the pandemic. And then the Small Business Administration loans are still kind of hanging out there. And so I have a link here to this really great spreadsheet that a business organization, national business organization, set up. And they have just about up to the day updates on the latest things that are happening with these programs. I just looked this morning and it's still listing the Paycheck Protection Program is open.
The event committee is discussing is to provide field captains.
And then the other two, I'm seeing that they're only funding what they call agricultural organizations for loans. So if you're an agricultural organization, there are still those types of loans that are being given. And so, that's something to still consider. And I think most of you are probably at least somewhat aware of those. But, some of these grants, particularly the Paycheck Protection Program, or some of these loans, I should say, they're almost more like grants, because in a lot of cases you're able to get forgiven for them. And so, if you still haven't taken a close look, you just want to read closely through the terms. And I would definitely recommend applying if you haven't. And even if they do run out of funds, there's still conversations all the time about adding more to those funds and replenishing those. Just about a week ago, I just wanted to mention about North Carolina HB 1043, which is a spending package that was passed. And so it's basically allocating federal funding that's sent to the state from the CARE Act. And I'm just listing not all of the money here, but where a lot of the money goes that's impacting nonprofit organizations, or that could possibly impact nonprofit organizations. And so I didn't see anything immediately posted that had links to how you would apply for these funds or how they're going to be distributed. But I did just want you to be aware if you fit into any of these categories, because I'm sure that you could call your state representative and ask questions, and I imagine they could point you to other resources or to tell you sort of where to watch for when these resources are going to be available. Other resources, I've recently, just full disclosure, I'm doing some free grant writing for these folks, just to partner with them. But I thought I would share this resource because it's a really nice resource that they've developed, and they're in the process of taking it statewide, and they want to also take it nationwide. And it's a free site where you can go and you can, if you have resources, like for instance, if you're a farm and you have 18 tons of potatoes or whatever, corn, I guess I should say, sitting there, and you don't know what to do with it, then, if you've got any kind of resource, you could go on this site and it'll match you with nonprofits in need. And so those of you on this call who have needs, which I'm sure is all of you, you could go to this site, and if you want to post something about what you're doing and what you're needing, especially if it's something that could be provided free by a business, like for instance, I would say if you need consulting help or legal help or technical assistance or anything like that, you might as well go on, it's free, and post what you need. And it might be that they can match you up with somebody who can provide what you're looking for. So that's the link to that there. I thought I would share this list too, even though this is, it's going back to the beginning of early April when this was posted. It just was a really nice list that a senator posted, that's sort of like a PDF with hot links, and it lists this comprehensive list of all of the obscure and non-obscure sources of resources that have come from the CARES Act. And so there's funding in a lot of different health and human services categories, and for the NEA even, and just for all different kinds of relief that has come out. And it's sort of a mix of grant opportunities and resources for nonprofits, and also for just all kinds of individuals and businesses. So in terms of what to expect next, which we would all like to know, right, is there's a couple sites that I've been especially paying attention to that I thought I'd share. So one is the Giving Compass page, and I've seen a few different pages like this one. I think this is probably my favorite in terms of ones that they list nationally all the different grant opportunities that are related to COVID-19. The last time I looked, they had at least a few hundred that were on there. And so they're not gonna really tell you more probably than I have as far as what's available locally, but particularly if you're doing something that has an impact that a national funder might look at, or if you're doing something in another state and you want to see what grants have been issued in terms of emergency response, then that's a good page to look at, and you can filter it in different ways so that you're you're getting what you need there. There's also a North Carolina COVID-19 page, and it's not as helpful in terms of listing funding opportunities as some of the states that I've seen, but it's got a lot of general information on there that might help you out if you're just trying to trace which resources are being provided right now from the state. And there's also this page at BoardSource that's a nonprofit and board member response page. And obviously, since it's BoardSource, it's got a lot of resources that are geared towards either board members or how to get the most from your board members right now, and just what to be saying to your board, and then just some other really good general resources. And I'm going to pause there, Ben, for see if there's anything else that's come in terms of questions.
No questions in the queue, but does anyone have anything they'd like to ask?
Okay, I'm just about to the end here, so so if you do have any, please do think about it and ask. So there's also I thought I would just list just a big overview of CARES Act. It's very specific what it's funding, and so it's more if you're in one of these other areas of hospitals, education, or transit, where this would have an impact on you, but there's more details on CARES Act here if you just if you're looking for an overview. And then the only other thing that I have here that I wanted to share was just resources for staying sane, just some resources that I like. These are mostly just fun things and not fundraising sorts of things, especially if you have a family and you just are looking for free and new stuff. So there's this comprehensive list of free stuff, and there's some tips for caring for yourself. And there's this really terrific calendar of live stream events that my wife pointed me to. If you have a kid, that it lists events all day, every day. And there's a good little thing that has tips about virtual meeting check-ins from Beth Cantor, who's a great fundraiser. Yeah, I mean, and I just thought I'd throw this in because I'm talking to a lot of people, not surprisingly, who are really stressed out right now and are tired of not knowing what's going to come. And so I'm just saying that in the spirit of, I'm there too. I'm sure a lot of you are, at least on some days, and just that that you're not alone, and there's a lot of resources out there right now for being totally stressed out and not sure what's going to happen next. So I wanted to share some of those. But thanks again to everybody for participating. And again, I've got, if you go to my website, which is just the last part of my email here, it's got a link to the page that has these resources on it, so that you could just go through and click on the links instead of having to get them from this presentation. And I'll stop there unless there's other folks who want to jump in with questions or suggestions, which would be great.
Mark, I've got one question from Terry Bowman. She asks, what have you seen in the form of reporting requirements on some of these grants?
Yeah, hey Terry. I've been focusing so hard on getting grants out of the door that I have not really been paying as much attention, honestly, to the reporting, but it does seem like in a lot of cases, the reporting requirements, like a lot of the COVID-19 applications, have been kind of stripped down. And so it seems like they're not going to be onerous. An exception might be for something like the FEMA grants that require a lot of documentation, and you have to really be able to show exactly what you've done. However, I will also point out that if you're thinking of a FEMA grant, there are Category B reimbursements, which are for most of the services I mentioned. And then there's also this thing that I only recently learned about called Category Z, as in zebra, that funds administrative costs and overhead. And so for instance, if you wanted to have somebody like a temp sitting at your scanner all day documenting what you've done and your expenses, you could pay somebody to do that and get reimbursed for it. And so, so that's good to know if you're applying for something like that. But yeah, thanks, Terry.
Terry also mentions that on the federal side, they're being told to keep all receipts and purchase explanations.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, that's something I would definitely recommend, regardless of the reporting requirements that you're seeing right now. Is you know, document everything that you can, and make sure you have everything in writing so that you can go back and have a paper trail.
Great. And Julia Buchanan asks, so turnaround times have been very short. Do you feel grant makers are expecting less from grants or still expect a fully developed proposal?
I think that the COVID-19 ones, and again, as I was saying, I think that this is going to be less the case going forward, but I think they're definitely expecting less, you know, because I think that they're recognizing that there's a lot that's being put on people at nonprofits, and I think they're just trying to do what they can to help. And so I would, as with other grant applications, I'd be as specific as possible about how you're going to spend the money, but also know that I think they're going to be more understanding if there's this very quick turnaround and you're not able to get a very detailed estimate, say, or something like that. You know, I think they're going to be more forgiving than usual about those sorts of things. Anything else, Ben, that you're seeing there coming in?
Not at the moment. Any other questions from the group? Lots of words of thanks coming through, Mark, from lots of folks.
You're very welcome, and I think about you all the time, and you know, I miss everybody, and I hope that everybody's hanging in there okay and is doing well.
All right. With that, we will wrap up today. Thank you so much, Mark, for being willing to do this presentation for our chapter. It means a lot. Now the chat's being flooded with words of thanks, which are very, very appropriate. Thanks everyone for joining today for AFP WNC's monthly offering. We will be back next month with another virtual offering. Please stay tuned for details on that. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can reach me at president-elect@afpwnc.org. And I'm happy to answer any questions or chat with you about anything at all. Thanks, everyone.